Yep. You can just put it on my desk. Thank you.
Somewhere in there.
All right, guys. So what we're doing today is we are finishing the note sheet from Friday. Finishing up the note sheet from Friday.
They're both 3.6.
Yep. 3.6. That one. 3.6. Yep.
Was that the day that I threw everything in my backpack?
3.6. Yep. We got through this one, yes? I believe we did the first three. Okay. So, all right, guys, focus up here, focus up here, focus, hats off. All right, guys, so what we're doing today is we're finishing the note sheet over solving quadratic equations by the quadratic formula, using the quadratic formula to solve this equation. Now, the first thing we need to do in solving by the quadratic formula is we need to get the equation equal to 0. So for this one here, 2x squared plus 4 equals negative 7x. We need to move everything to the same side. Now, there's two ways we can do it. One is that we move the 2x squared, the 4, over to the negative 7x. Or we can move the 7x over to the 2x squared and the 4. I think it's going to be easier to move the 7x over than to move the 2x squared over and then to move the 4 over. So instead of moving 2, we're just moving one thing. Now, negative 7x plus 7x is going to be 0. Now, on the left-hand side, 2x squared, 7x, and 4, none of those are like terms. So we're just going to write it in standard form. Standard form is our decreasing exponents. So x squared term goes first, x term goes second, and then the term without a variable goes third, our constant term. Now, one other thing we need from this equation is we need to figure out what the values of a, b, and c are. A is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is our constant term. So if we look at this here, what would the value of a be? A would be positive 2. B would be 7. Positive 7, and C is 4. So A is 2, B is 7, C is 4. And we use those values in our equation. And our equation for the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now what we're going to do is take the values of a, b, c, and plug them into their corresponding spots. So a is 2. So the two places where a shows up, we're going to replace it with its value of 2. B is 7. So the two places where B shows up, we're going to replace it with 7. And lastly, C is 4. And the only place C shows up, we're going to replace it with 4. So we have negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 7 squared minus 4 times 2 times 4 all over 2 times 2. Questions on this so far? Now we just need to simplify. So our negative 7 is going to be negative 7. The denominator, 2 times 2 is 1. Next thing we can do is we're going to take everything inside the radical. Not the radical, but everything inside the radical. We can stick that in the calculator. So we can say 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 4. Make sure I got that typed in, right? 2. 7 times, so 7 squared minus 4 times 2 times 4 is 17. So it tells us what's inside the radical is going to reduce to 17. Questions on this so far? Now we need to make sure that the square root of 17 doesn't reduce. And luckily the 30xs will reduce it to simplest radical form, which is still the square root of 17. So that doesn't reduce. The last thing we need to make sure for simplifying is that the top two terms, our negative 7 and the square root of 17, do not share common factors with each other or the 4 on bottom, which they don't, because if they did, we would need 1, have a number in front of the radical, and 4 and negative 7 don't share common factors to begin with, so this does not reduce. Even if it had been 4 square roots of 17, those share, but because the negative 7 and 4 don't, this is as simplified as it gets. So the final answer is negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 17 all over 4. Questions on this here? We ready for the next one? 5x squared equals x plus 8. Again, the first thing we need to do is get this equation equal to 0. Let's not use the calligraphy pen. So the first thing I'll need to do is now we could have subtracted the x from both sides and then subtracted the 8, but again, it's easier to just move the 5x squared over than it is to move the x and 8. Now that after subtracting 5x squared from both sides, 5x squared minus 5x squared is 0. Negative 5x squared, x and 8 are not like terms, so we just get negative 5x squared plus x plus 8. Now, when we factored this, or went about factoring, we wanted the value of a to be positive 5, so it would make factoring simpler. When we did completing the square, we wanted the value of a to be positive 1, so we had to do things to make it be positive 1, had to do things to make it be positive. Quadratic formula does not care. It just needs it equal to 0. We find the values of a, b, c. Now, the value of a for us is negative 5. The value of b is 1, and the value of c is 8. So once we find the values of a, b, c, we just need to plug them into their corresponding spots. Now the value of a is negative 5. So the two places a is at, one in the 4ac and the a on bottom, 2a, we plug in negative 5 for a. B is 1. So the two places where b shows up, we're going to plug 1 in its place. And lastly, c is 8. So we replace A with its value of -5, B with its value of 1, and C with its value of 8. So we're just plugging in the values of A, B, C. And then we need to simplify. Well, -1 is just -1. On bottom, we have 2 times -5, which is -10. Now we need to simplify what's inside the radical. We could do it by hand, saying 1 squared is 1, and then do 4 times -5, which would be -20, times 8, which would be -160, and then 1 minus -160, and find that there. Or we can come over here and say 1 squared minus 4 times -5 times 8, -5 times 8, and it tells us it is 161. So at this point here, we have -1 plus or minus the square root of 161 all over -10. Questions on this here so far? Now, at this point here, I would grab the yellow calculator, the 30xs, and just make sure that we cannot take the square root of 161. We cannot write it in a reduced form or a more reduced form than this here. So the square root of 161 is in simplest radical form. Any questions on anything we've done so far? Now the only thing we have left to do is, I do not like, in most ways, we do not want to have a -10. We don't want that negative in the bottom of the fraction. So what we do is we factor it out of the denominator and multiply it through the top. We can either move it to the front or multiply that negative through the top. Now, we're not changing numbers, we're just multiplying by a negative. Now, the denominator, we factor that negative out. So it's going to go from -10 to +10. Now, the -1, if I multiply the -1 by a negative, it becomes +1. Now, we do still have the square root of 161. Now, the plus and the plus or minus. When I multiply a positive, a plus by a negative, it becomes what? Negative, yes? So we dealt with the positive case of the plus or minus. Now a negative times a negative is a positive. So when we multiplied the plus or minus by a negative, it became plus or minus. Because the plus became minus and the minus became plus. So they flipped, but it's still plus or minus. And that's it. X equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 161 over 10. Any questions on this here? So the biggest thing with the quadratic formula is not so much in the process itself, it's just simplifying. The biggest part of the quadratic formula is simplifying. Now we look at this one here, 25x squared minus 8x equals 12x minus 4. We need to get this equation equal to 0. So what can we do first? I'm going to subtract 12x from both sides. We still have the 25x squared. But for the first time, we actually do have like terms. -8 minus 12x are like terms. -8 minus 12 gives us -20x equals -4. Now we're going to add 4 to both sides, telling us that we have 25x squared minus 20x plus 4 is equal to 0. Still need to find the values of A, B, C. A would be 25. B would be negative 20. And C is 4. Because we have to take the negative with the 20 and minus with the 20. Negative b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, if you especially don't feel comfortable with the simplifying or making sure you're simplifying it correctly, the biggest thing I would say, especially on the test, is make sure to fill in A, B, and C like we're about to do. Because we could start with A. A is 25. So in the two places A shows up, we can replace it with 25. B is negative 20. Replace it with its number. And lastly, C is 4. So if you feel a little uncomfortable with the simplifying steps, I would plug it in just like this here. I would make sure this does show up as part of the steps on the test. Because that's telling me, yes, you know how to do, you do have it set up, you do have it plugged in correctly. I do get points for plugging it in and having it set up correctly. Because from here, all we're having to do is simplify down. Our negative, negative 20. The negative and negative make a positive, telling us that we have 20. On bottom, 2 times 25 is 50. So we simplify the negative, negative. 2 times 25 is 50. Now we just need to calculate what negative 20 squared minus 4 times 25 times 4 is. Negative 20 squared minus 4 times 25 times not 8, 4 is 0. So that's telling us that x is equal to negative 20 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 50. All right, guys, let's focus in. What is the square root of 0? 0. Now, can we add 20 and 0? Yeah, we can add 20 and 0. We can subtract 20 and 0. So we will need to simplify this. All right, guys, focus in, focus in. So if we can add or subtract the two numbers, the two numerators, we need to add and subtract. Now, 0 doesn't tell us a whole lot because 20 plus 0 is 20. And 20 over 50 reduces to 2/5. Twenty minus 0 is still 20. So 20 over 50 is 2/5. Really what this is telling us that the x, our solution for this here, is equal to 2/5, and x is equal to 2/5. So we still do have two solutions for this. It's just those two solutions that we have for the system, or not the system, but this equation are not unique solutions. We have the same value, it just shows up twice. Questions on this here? We have one more of this type that we're going to look at, and then we're going to cover the last piece before the end of chapter 3. Are we ready for the last equation, solving by quadratic formula? Negative x squared plus 4x equals 13. All right, guys. So the first thing we need to do is get this equation equal to 0. So we can subtract 13 from both sides. Now, as we saw before, having a be negative did have us having to divide to get rid of that negative out of the bottom of the fraction. So if we wanted to at this point, we could multiply by -1 to fix it, or we can leave it alone. Either way works. If we leave it, the next thing we need to do is just find the values of a, b, c. A would be -1. B would be +4, and c is -13. -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're going to plug a into its spot. B and c. Well, -4 is just -4. 2 times -1 is -2. Now we do need to simplify our 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times -13. 4 squared minus 4 times -1 times -13 is -36. Now at this point here, we do need to see if we can simplify the square root of -36. Now the 30xs won't take the square root of -36 because it will not simplify a negative inside of a radical. But the negative inside the square root will come out as I. Now, since we're able to take the negative, that I, out of the radical, because I is the square root of -1, we factor that out. We're really just trying to now simplify the square root of 36. And the square root of 36 is 6, telling me also that the square root of -36 would be 6i. So what we have is x is equal to -4 plus or minus 6i over -2. And this is the final answer as long as our top two numbers, 4 and 6, are not share or do not share a common factor with the denominator of 2. But they do. They all share a common factor of 2. So really what we're going to do at this point here, because we walked through the other day or Friday how we would do this step by step out. We would factor the 2 out or -2 out and go through this here. Or what we can do is divide every term by -2. Because on Friday and most of what we did, we just divided it by 2, but because the denominator is negative, we do need to simplify that negative out. Now on bottom, -2 divided by -2 would be +1. So we don't have to write the denominator because it is just 1. Now on top, -4 divided by -2. The negative and negative would make a positive. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now we need to divide 6i by -2. But because of the plus and minus, it's really just going to end up being plus and minus. The minus would become plus. The plus becomes minus. Really telling us that we have 6i divided by 2, which is 3i. So the solution for this here is x is equal to 2 plus or minus 3i. Questions on this here? So a lot of the quadratic formula is less actually solving steps and more just simplifying the thing down. Questions on anything we've done so far? Last thing we're covering is the discriminant. Now the discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac. It's what's inside that radical. And it tells us a few things. If the value of the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, is greater than 0, we should have two real solutions. If what's inside the radical, that b squared minus 4ac, its value is greater than 0, the problem will have two real solutions. If the value b squared minus 4ac is 0, we have one real solution, or really one unique solution. We had that already today, because when we got it equal to 0, it told us that the solution was 2/5, and the solution was 2/5. We had 2/5, we had one real solution. If the value, that b squared minus 4ac, is less than 0, we have two complex solutions. We have two imaginary solutions like we had on the last one. Because b squared minus 4ac was negative 36, it's less than 0. We have two complex solutions. So, we're going to look at a few of these here with the discriminant, kind of telling what the value is and what type of solutions we should have. So x squared minus 6x plus 10. Doing this just like solving, all right guys, doing this just like we did with solving, we need to get the equation first equal to 0. Then we need to find the values of a, b, c. Well, x squared minus 6x plus 10 is indeed equal to 0. A is 1, b is negative 6, and c is 10. Now we need to find the discriminant, the value of the discriminant, which is b squared minus 4ac. Now the value of b is negative 6. The value of a is 1, and the value of c is 10. So we plug b, a, and c in. Now we just need to evaluate this. So we can grab the calculator and say negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10. And it tells us that this reduces to negative 4. So the value of the discriminant is negative 4. Is that greater than 0, less than 0, or equal to 0? Since it is less than 0, we have two complex solutions. And that's it. It's not asking us to solve because it is asked for the value of the discriminant, which is negative 4. The number of solutions that we have is 2, and their type is real. That's it. Now, if we were to solve it, negative b, so it'd be negative negative 6, plus or minus, because what's inside the radical was our b squared minus 4ac. Well, we already found that value. It is negative 4 over 2. Okay. So if we were plugging this back into the quadratic formula, we'd have x equals negative b, our negative negative 6. Well, the negative negative 6 would just be 6, plus or minus, the denominator is 2. Square root of negative 4 would be 2i. Because that number inside the radical was negative, the negative comes out as I, telling us that we have complex solutions. So if the number inside, or the discriminant, is negative, we get complex solutions. Now this does reduce, telling us x is equal to 3 plus or minus I. But really the value of the discriminant kind of gives us a hint at what the type of solutions we should have. If it's negative, we have complex. If it's 0, we have one unique solution. And if it's greater than 0, we should have two real solutions. Let's look at the next one. x squared minus 6x plus 9. Now a is still 1, b is negative 6, and c is 9. B squared minus 4ac. Negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. Now negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9, we can plug it in. 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9 is 0. So since it is equal to 0, it tells us we have what? One real solution. One real solution. Because the discriminant is equal to 0, it tells us we have one real solution. All right, guys. The next one, x squared minus 6x plus 8. A is still 1, b is still negative 6, but this time c is 8. B squared minus 4ac. Negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 8. So the next thing we would need to do is take that and plug it into the calculator. And it tells us that it is 4, which would be 2 real solutions. Questions on this here? Questions on the discriminant? Because even if we had fractions, or if they're not on the same side, all we got to do is get them to the same side of the equation, plug in the values of a, b, c, and simplify. Because even with number 10, we would subtract 6 from both sides. Telling us that this equation is 7x squared minus 3x minus 6, which means a is 7, b is negative 3, c is negative 6. So if we wanted to find the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, we would plug in as negative 3 squared minus 4 times negative 6 times 7. I flipped those, but that's fine. Because b squared minus 4ac. So negative 3 squared minus 4 times 7 times negative 6 is 177. That is greater than 0, so we have 2 real solutions. So we need the 177 and 2 real solutions. We need its value, and because it is greater than 0, it tells us we have 2 real solutions. Questions on this here? That's it. Now 6 through 16 even. 6 through 16 even, you're solving the following quadratic equations by the quadratic formula, simplifying where needed. 21 through 24. find the value of the discriminant, the value of b squared minus 4ac, and then tell whether it's either two real solutions, one real solution, or two complex solutions.